Hi everyone, this is Amber Martinez and
Miss Turner.
and we are here today to talk to you a little bit about the first grade math curriculum. We thank you for joining in, and we're really glad that you are taking the time out of your day to spend with us a few minutes to learn about what your child is doing in math. So we're just going to jump right in. Here I have a sheet that contains all of our first grade math standards. The ones in green are our priority standards, and these mean that they're the ones that we're really focusing on. The other standards we cover, but the other standards lead into the priority standards. So throughout the year and on the report card, you're going to see these different priority standards listed. A couple of days ago, Mr. Yarborough shared a list of all of those priority standards with you on Class Dojo if you're connected. However, if you did not get that, or you weren't able to pull it up, or you want it all on one page, if you'll let your child's homeroom teacher know, we'll make sure that you can get a copy of all the standards. So we're just going to go over the standards, the different strands, and talk about some ideas of ways you can practice these things at home. So the very first standard is our operations and algebraic thinking. So in this standard, we cover being able to add and subtract within 20. This also incorporates being able to solve word problems and not only just word problems that add and subtract, but also word problems where students have to find the unknown number in a problem. So it might say that there were 7 cookies in a jar and Max ate some. Now there are 4 cookies. How many cookies did Max eat? So now they're trying to find that missing add-in within the problem. We also look for them to relate counting to addition and subtraction. So we want them to understand the fact that they can count on or count back to solve problems. We want them to be able to fluently add and subtract within 10. So that means any number within 10, you should be able to give them an addition and subtraction problem, and they should be able to complete it quickly. Fluently means quickly and accurately. And then last, we want them to be able to determine the unknown whole number in addition or subtraction equation relating 3 whole numbers. So that goes back to finding that missing add-in, sometimes with the word problem and sometimes without the word problem. So some ways that you could help at home: you could make flashcards to really practice being able to add and subtract within 10. That's really important because the quicker they can solve these problems is the better math student they will be, not only in first grade, but also in the long run. Also, make up problems for them to solve just anytime, you know.
Time is always a factor. So if you're on the go like we are all the time, riding down the road, come up with a story and letting them think and give you the answer. And that's a good time to review as you're traveling.
Okay. So I'll let you go into our next strand.
Okay. Our next strand is geometry. And it is to distinguish between defining attributes of, do we want to talk about that? Closed and open, because we haven't really got it. But composing 2-dimensional shapes like rectangles and squares, trapezoids, half circles, quarter circles. Then we're going to go into 3-dimensional shapes like cubes, rectangular prisms, cones, cylinders. So, you know, when you're at home, you know, look for those kind of shapes and point them out. If you're riding down the road, try to find those shapes if you see it on a sign. Or you can be a shape detective and I spy something. All kinds of things that you can do with these shapes that you would see in your everyday life.
Another thing you can do is have your child prove to you how do they know that it's that shape. So if they say, oh, the fan is shaped like a square, how do you know it's shaped like a square? Oh, because it has 4 sides and 4 vertices and all the sides are the same length. So being able to prove and name those attributes as they're looking at shapes.
So in your everyday life, if you're eating a pizza, what kind of shape that is. If you cut it in half, you know, then it's a half circle. there's all kinds of things if you really think about it. We see shapes in everything we do.
And then later in the year, we'll move into also being able, beginning concepts of fractions. That's covered in our geometry as well. So in first grade, they need to understand about equal shares. That's one way we talk about fractions. And we do fractions in halves and in fourths in first grade. So we don't go above that unless your child is showing an acceleration in math. Sometimes we may challenge them a little bit to look at other fractions, but we really in our standards the focus is on fourths, or they may hear it called quarters, and then halves. Okay, our next strand is kind of related really closely to the first strand, and it's numbers and operations in base 10. And we always talk about friends of 10, you know, numbers that combine together to make 10, thinking in terms of 10. And so they're different standards within that we want them to understand. We really want them to have a grasp of the base 10 concept. So the first priority standard that we have is that students should be able to count to 120 starting at any number less than 120. And when we say count, we mean count forwards, count backwards, give them a random number to start at, you know, start at 79 and count until I tell you to stop. They should also recognize the numbers 1 to 120. So if you show them a card that has the number 75 on it, they should be able to quickly tell you that that's 75.
I think our parents get so used to children counting. It's like saying your ABCs. Children can sing the ABC song, but if you take a letter out of that context, can they read it? Numbers are the same way. You can start with 1 and go 1, 2, 3, 4, and your child might can rote count, but again, it's taking those numbers out of order, and they should still know those numbers.
And then they also are required to represent a number of objects with a written numeral. So if we show them 75, they should be able to know that they're 75 and be able to write that number. So just really having that good foundation of numbers from 0 to 120 is super important, so that they can, if you don't know the numbers, you can't solve the addition problem. If you don't know the numbers and you're not fluent with them, then you're going to have trouble with just about anything that we do in math. The other thing that they need to be able to do is compare two-digit numbers based on the meaning of the tens and one digit. So what this means is that they should be able to tell you, if you tell them the numbers 25 and 57, they should be able to tell you, well, 57 is greater than 25. And if you ask them how they know, well, because there's a 5 in the tens place, and I know that that represents 50, and 50 is greater than 20. So these are things we've not gotten there yet this year, but as we go on, we will be doing these. They should also understand the greater than, less than, and equal to symbol when we get to this part of our year. So we'll be teaching them that, and they should be able to, we teach them that mathematicians use these symbols to compare the numbers, and so they should understand the meaning of those. Much later in the year, after we've had lots of practice with adding single digit numbers and adding our teen numbers, we'll also work to add within 100 using a one-digit number and a two-digit number. So we may say 75 plus 20, or something to that effect. I'm sorry. And we'll be teaching them to think of that in terms of 10. So if I have 75, I have 7 groups of 10 and 5 groups of 1. And then plus 20, I need 2 more groups of 10. And in first grade, it's very manipulative oriented. They have the cubes or the 10 frames in front of them, and they're manipulating those to be able to solve those problems. And then later, we try to push them even further to be able to solve them without the manipulatives. They also, we want them, we'll focus on this later throughout this year as well. We want them, if we give them a 2-digit number, we want them to be able to, in their head, mentally find 10 more or 10 less. So if I tell them the number 57, I want them to be able to know, oh, 10 more is 67 and 10 less is 47.
So when you think about tens, it's not just counting by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Again, they're learning to rote count that, but actually understanding what 10 more and 10 less means. So it doesn't necessarily have to start with 10. You can start with 3 and 10 more is 13 and 10 more is 23, or starting with a larger number and taking away 10. So 53 would be 10 less is 43.
And then last in that particular strand is being able to subtract multiples of 10 in the range of 10 to 90 with a positive result. So we later throughout the year, they may see problems like 80 minus 40. So being able to, and even like 72 minus 30, but it'll always be, the first number will always be, could be anything, but the second number will always be a factor of 10. So they'll see that. And again, just like in addition, it'll be heavily done with models and manipulatives at first.
And our last strand is measurement and data. In measurement and data, we're going to start off by ordering 3 objects by length and compare the lengths of the 2 objects by using a third object. We're going to be talking about expressing length of an object as a whole number of length of units.
And making sure they measure correctly. So in first grade, I'm not going to just hand them a ruler right away and say, here, go measure this. In first grade, we use a lot of non-standard units of measure. And we talk about why it's important to be able to understand and use those things. So we'll measure things with our feet. We'll measure things with paper clips. We'll measure things with 1-inch tiles. And talking about, too, making sure when we measure things, if we're going to use these non-standard units, they have to touch. They can't overlap, because touching and overlapping affects the way we measure. We have to start at the beginning and go all the way to the end, or we don't get the correct measurement.
So if you're doing something at home, or if you have a project going on, or if maybe that's your job, or talk to your child about measuring. If you need something measured, use something at home like a non-standard first. Measure with a piece of paper from end to end. Show them a ruler, but also show them exactly where they start at the end and make sure it matches up. Just different things that you can go ahead and expose them to, so that when we get to measurement and data, they have an understanding of that concept. Also in measurement and data, we're going to be talking about telling and writing time to the hour and half hour, using both an analog clock and a digital clock. So we'll be learning to read an analog clock by looking at the hands. We'll be talking about the hour hand and the minute hand, time to the hour, and then time to the half hour. They might also hear, what do you call quarter?
It's not in our standards, but with some of our students, if they get the hour and the half hour really quick, we go ahead and teach them the quarter hour, because we talk about quarters. We teach this unit in relation to our unit where we talk about fractions, because we're teaching them that half of a circle, we call that a half. And then we can also teach them that half of the clock means half an hour or 30 minutes have passed. So since we talk about quarters, some of them make that connection, and we encourage them to make that connection. And some of them need to be pushed in that direction, because they get the hour and the half hour really quickly. One of the things that we notice a lot that they struggle with is when we're talking about time to the half hour. If you think about the clock, they think the hand should be exactly on, the hand that points to the hour should be exactly on that hour. But if you look on the clock at the half hour time, that hand will be halfway between the 2 numbers. So if it's 7:30, my hour hand is halfway between my 7 and my 8. And so a lot of the kids want to call that 8:30. So that's a little confusing for them sometimes. But we teach them that same thing. It's a half hour time. The the hand is halfway between the 7 and the 8. So we would go back up to 7. It would be 7:30.
And with technology being what it is today, and phones and, everything is digital, they normally pick up pretty quickly on a digital clock, but now we're going to go back and again use the analog clock. So if you have a watch that's actually an analog watch, or another clock or something like that in the house, that would be great for you to work on telling time.
And analog clocks are not really that expensive, so even maybe buy one to have in your house so that you can talk about those times. It's an important skill for students to have. And we will do a little bit of representing data this year as well. So we will represent data with up to 3 categories. So we focus on that a little bit. It's not a priority standard, but we will do that in some different things. And sometimes we do that and we're not even in math class. My class likes to vote what they want to do when the class earns a reward party. And so we may have 3 options and let each person vote. So sometimes we hit that standard, even though it's not necessarily in math. And we talk about, which one had more, which category won, how many more were in that category, how many less people voted for wearing their pajamas. So these are good conversations to have as well. You could graph data. Just a quick graph, if you're asking your kids what they want for dinner and everybody in the family has a different opinion, a quick graph and talk about which one won and how do they know how many more wanted pizza tonight than, chicken. So that would be an easy way to practice that skill.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers really quickly and in a very condensed version all of our standards. But also know as your first grade team, we are here to help you. So if you get a paper home and you're not really sure what happened, if you see something and you're not really sure, please know that we're always here to help. If you see that your child is struggling with something, we don't assign math homework typically. But if you see your child is struggling with a particular subject or you see a lot of grades come home that concern you, reach out to your child's teacher and ask for ways that they can help, that you can help at home, specifically on what your child needs. Math is all around us, and it's generally something easy that we can give you some quick ideas about ways to practice it as you go about your everyday life. So we hope to hear from you. If you have any questions or concerns, please let us know. If you want a condensed version of the standards, the priority standards will have a star beside them. They won't be highlighted. Just let your child's homeroom teacher know, and we will get those out to you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Bye.